Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you all, from those down the road to the folks around the world. Welcome back to another video. This time we're going to be looking at a journey across the English countryside towards France. For in 1520, King Henry VIII of England set off from his palace of Placentia, based in Greenwich, and travelled south across to France, to the place which has been famously called the Field of the Cloth of Gold, to meet with his French counterpart, Francis I. But this journey across the English countryside came with its own twist of diplomatic intrigue. For in the days and weeks prior to this diplomatic spectacle of French and English courts, there was to be another meeting in the city of Canterbury between King Henry VIII of England, as well as the most powerful European leader of the time, Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, the King of Spain, the Archduke of Austria, the Lord of the Netherlands, and the Duke of Burgundy. So, without further ado, let us begin this journey across to France, with a quick stop in Canterbury. So let us start at the beginning of our journey, the start point, which is the Palace of Placentia, sometimes called Greenwich Palace if you're feeling less pedantic. Now this palace had been holding Henry VIII's court since about 1512, just 3 years after he'd come to the English throne. It is where he had been born in 1491, and it is where his 2 daughters and future Queens of England, Mary and Elizabeth, had been born in 1516 and 1533 respectively. We often associate Hampton Court Palace as being this great palace for Henry VIII and his court, but it only came into his kingly possession in 1529 with the fall of its previous owner, Thomas Wolsey. And ironically enough, whether it be irony or not, Thomas Wolsey was the man who coordinated these 2 great diplomatic meetings between England and France, and between England and the Holy Roman Empire. Now, unfortunately, this Greenwich Palace, Palace of Placentia, does not exist in this modern world anymore, having been demolished about a century and a half after the accession of Henry VIII as King of England. But there are archaeological remnants underneath the more modern maritime buildings that are associated with the Greenwich area today. Henry VIII made his way from Greenwich Palace on the 22nd of May 1520 and made his first overnight stop at Otford Palace, one of the many residences to the Archbishops of Canterbury. This particular Archbishop, William Warham, had conducted the marriage ceremony between King Henry and his first of 6 wives, Catherine of Aragon. And in the years since becoming the Archbishop, he had been rebuilding Otford Palace into a grand palace similar in style and extent to that of Hampton Court and Greenwich Palace also. Otford was a natural stop point when travelling between London and the city of Canterbury, or indeed if you were going further on towards the port of Dover, because it was all on a direct route, a direct road called the Canterbury Way, used by not only kings and queens like Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, but also other diplomats, other dignitaries, pilgrims travelling towards Canterbury to visit the shrine of the great Thomas Becket. The following day, which be the 23rd of May 1520, Henry VIII and his large retinue of courtiers would have travelled further south towards the village of Charing, another one of these great palaces in the English countryside. But in the local parish church as well, there is a significant item of religious importance. Displayed within this parish church for the previous 350 years up to 1520 was a block which supposedly was the site of John the Baptist's execution in early Christianity. It had been picked up by King Richard I on one of his many crusades in the Holy Land throughout his life, and as I say, displayed within this church. But unfortunately, this block has been lost in the decades since 1520 as the church burnt down in 1590. Taking a few steps back within the village of Charing, we can see all or most of the significant medieval buildings that would have been known to Henry VIII in 1520. We can see the palace, which had an adjoining dining hall. It is said that this particular palace was gifted to the Archbishops of Canterbury in the late 8th century, although most of the foundations that we know about today only date to about the 12th or 13th century, so about 500 years after. And then the adjoining parish church was probably dating to about the 13th century also, with the main tower having been constructed about a century after. On the following 24th of May 1520, Henry VIII arrived at the city of Canterbury. But he wouldn't be there for too long, because he and a small group of his retinue, including that of Thomas Wolsey, would travel further on towards the port of Dover in anticipation of the imperial Charles V. Meanwhile, in the Spanish port of Corunna, Charles V had been waiting to leave the port for quite a number of weeks in order to meet the English king. But because of turbulent weather in the Bay of Biscay and the English Channel, it wasn't until the 26th of May that Charles V was able to arrive at the English port of Dover. He was greeted by Thomas Wolsey and taken to Dover Castle, where the two kings, Henry VIII and Charles V, would meet. Henry VIII returned back to the city of Canterbury on the 27th of May 1520, with the imperial Charles V in his company. And what followed was 2 days of revelry, partying, dancing, drinking, feasting, but also the religious ceremony of Mass, being Whit Sunday, and indeed the important part and the whole reason for this meeting was the diplomatic treaty that was going to be signed on the early 29th of May. Charles V was keen to remind Henry that he was the leader of a growing superpower. He was already the King of Spain, but just the previous year, in 1519, he had inherited from his predecessor Maximilian I the Holy Roman Empire. But whilst Charles was pressing his political dominance within Europe, he was also quite nervous, because he wanted to fight against the other growing superpower of Europe, France, specifically in the northern Italian regions, which both France and the Holy Roman Empire had laid claim towards. So the diplomatic talks between Henry and Charles were in not desperation, but in an attempt by Charles to regain support from the English king against France before any treaty could be signed between England and France at the Field of the Cloth of Gold. The big main points to come out of this diplomatic discussion between Henry and Charles was a 5-year extension to an already existing trading agreement. Nothing concrete was actually put onto paper. Friendly remarks and gestures were made between the two kings, but nothing in so much of a great treaty. But they did commit and promise to meet again soon after the events of the Field of the Cloth of Gold, just outside of Calais, on neutral territory. The day was coming to a close, and the negotiations were coming to conclusion. At an hour before sunset, Charles and Henry, with their respective retinues, left the city of Canterbury, travelling for about 5 miles in each other's company, before parting ways. Thomas Wolsey escorted Charles to the port of Sandwich, where he would take a ship east towards the Netherlands to a place called Flushing. And Henry, well, of course, he would make his way to the port of Dover, sailing across the English Channel to Calais, the only English territory within the French nation. Henry would stay a few days in Calais before making headway towards and into the Picardy region, to the site which is now synonymously called and known as the Field of the Cloth of Gold, a 12,000-acre site with temporary palaces, sporting events, feasting occasions, and of course the importance of diplomacy. And in the next video we will go through some of the details about what happened and the outcomes of the Field of the Cloth of Gold between King Henry VIII of England and Francis I of France. But until then, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I shall see you in the next video, hopefully. See you later.